Hi, everyone. This is Aaron Myers with Ishmael Interactive. Thank you for joining us in another of our speaker series. Today, we are joined by Laetitia Wolff. Laetitia, if you could introduce yourself and tell us what organization you represent.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Laetitia Wolff. I work by myself most of the time. I'm a free electron, but I affiliate myself with a number of organizations. The current one, I would say, the one I spend most of my time with is called Besign School, the Sustainable Design School in the south of France.
I've been reading up on that school and the B Lab, I believe it's called,
Mhm.
just to add some more credentials to the discussion. You just got into a award, I believe, 100 designers, something along that line. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. So the B Lab is my new little baby within the school of Design School. The idea was to create a space within the school that's a bit more experimental and more geared towards regenerative design. Um, in launching the nonprofit organization within a commercial school, we decided to submit it as a work in progress project to APCI, which is the national design organism in France that represents the design profession. If you wish, the equivalent of a AIGA in the States, perhaps, where I used to work, actually. And APCI launched for the first time in 2025 a new Design Impact Award that was, sort of the first time they officially recognized the importance of recognizing design practice that have sustainability as at the core of their mission. And so they launched this award. We submitted our project, again, work in progress project, and we were selected among 100 dossiers.
Amazing.
And we were very proud of it. We never made it to the 40 last ones, but we're proud of being part of the hundreds.
Getting selected in the hundreds is still an incredible honor and getting in through a very tight squeeze.
Yeah.
Now, only a small share of our audience are designers. A lot of them work with designers. So just to make sure we get all the terms out there, you mentioned regenerative design.
hmm
What would you call
So the
this?
yeah, I know it's a complicated thing. It's become a bit of a buzzword lately,
Yes.
as if, we didn't have enough with sustainable design and resilience and robustness and all these terms that are flying around. But regenerative approach is something that I became familiar myself fairly
Hmm.
recently, and I've been educating myself by my own means, by attending a number of seminars, webinars, and being part of a larger project here in the region called Regenerazer. The idea is to look at the way the designer has a heightened responsibility to give back to nature what he or she borrows it from. So it's this idea of like bringing back a sort of natural cycle to plants, to animals, to people. Always thinking in terms of benefits. What can I provide as a benefit as a designer, and not just take the stuff that I need, resource oriented, but being extremely conscious of how we can nurture back the environment in which we operate. So, needless to say, it's a nice thing on paper.
Hard
It
to
sounds
do.
fantastic and hard to do,
Yeah.
especially for new companies. Yeah.
So you mentioned sort of this, what can we give back? What are the values and benefits aspect of this form of design? I like this because it acknowledges one very fundamental truth that all these designs happen in places and
hmm
places with not just limited money, limited nature, limited social capital, all those things. So this probably feeds in a lot to your understanding because you've worked a lot in civic design and helping cities and municipalities and areas of government.
Hmm. Yes, it's true that my approach and my in a way my philosophy, and I was just on the phone a minute ago with someone who works literally as a facilitator and communicator for city government on these issues of sustainable development. And we're both saying, it's so important to position yourself as a designer. At least this is the way I like to think of projects with an address. Place-based means that you are belonging or you try to understand the fine roots and character, the context in which you work. You're connected to people, to roots, stories, to physical elements, to natural environments that are there to inform the way you're going to design. So by default, I always was very interested in the cities, the development of cities, the history of cities, and particularly the place of reinvention that's left in those very rigid structures that cities are often, especially in Europe. Um, so I've been very interested in always thinking in terms of like, what can we do here? And how do we learn how to um, practice a sort of very global, universal, generous, open approach, but by taking a super specific problem around us. So to give you an example, I maybe I'm speaking too vaguely right now, but it's true in the States. My work has been often developed in underserved communities, urban communities
Hmm.
that were historically abandoned by the municipal government. I can think of one important initiatives that I had the honor of leading for AIGA. New York was in East New York, which is, as the name indicates, in Brooklyn.
The
Sort of far,
small business project.
yeah, small business
Oh, I love that one.
initiatives.
Yes.
Yeah, really interesting because it was a sort of combo of many tectonic plates, like sort of aligning, right, with the Equitable City program of the mayor back then, but also with this very, ambitious and generous mission that he gave himself to reinvest in 8 different neighborhoods around New York that had been pretty much forgotten. So we came into this sort of like, yeah, we can, yes, we can mobilize a number of different municipal government agencies to um, re uh, what's the word? Re-inject
Yeah.
energy investments, better quality of life, whether it's the sidewalk or higher quality schools or delivering on public spaces, etc. But then at the same time, appearing to become uh, kind of like the helicopter showing up kind of late in the game and oh we're going to save everybody and we're going to solve all the
That's
problems
a
that
tough position.
right. So we felt very much like to have this sort of humble, very respectful approach to the people who live there and trying to understand again the context in which those new investments took place. And so one of the first, regenerative aspect that we could back then practice, this is like 2016, without necessarily using the term regenerative, was to just look at what is this sort of main street that composes the identity of a lot of these neighborhoods structured by? What communities are actually the most active 24 hours? And we looked at small commerce, small mom and pop shops that are open 24 hours that are always there when you get off the subway.
Right.
And yet they're rarely identified with the sort of postcard of a neighborhood. So we went back to these people. We went to these people and told them about this larger zoning plan and this larger urban development ambition of the city, and realized how little they felt part of the picture. And they literally did not feel that they had any right to claim to be part of this conversation. And
Yikes.
so we sort of gave them like, we empowered them in a way. That was
Right.
our to have a voice, to be part of the larger conversation, and to realize that small commerce owners are indeed part of the community. They're not because they're not activists or political activists or because they don't know how to speak English. It doesn't mean that they don't have anything to say.
So you're coming to this realization that they don't feel necessarily empowered or like the stakeholder that they are, if I can paraphrase what you just told
Hmm.
me. I imagine that though that you have to build a full narrative arc in terms of why they feel that way, what kind of actions that leads to. This makes me think of another project you did, which was building trust with the police in, I want to say Brownsville,
Hmm.
um, and trying to build a counter narrative. So
Yes.
can you lead me through that process then of you got the insight, but then you have to find out the formation of the insight and what the insight means in terms of project on the ground. How does that, how do you expand from that point?
Yeah, it's you're right. It's always like it's not a linear process for sure. It's
Yes.
very much like a iterative and circle, if I could use an image to this process. But in the case of the Brownsville project, it's interesting because it actually opened up some new opportunities for me to collaborate on security by design in Europe. Those
Yes.
past couple of years. But the police department had been the subject of various studies by Pratt Institute, first on the look and feel of the actual police station, the precinct. What does the precinct in Brownsville look like? They look like bunkers. So the Pratt student had worked for one semester through various, collaboration with the police department, very interested in having a sort of look of young architectural students to rethink the way they were perceived on the street level, on the neighborhood,
Yeah.
in the neighborhood, urban quality. Then a second semester was dedicated to the interior of the actual foyer when you enter such station, which is uh, how do we welcome people? Are they welcome? What does it look like with the glass thing, double or triple glass thing behind the screen? And so this was done by another school, which was the New York School of Interior Design,
Yes.
and we came third in a way on graphic design and social design. And the way I came into this picture is via a really interesting platform that I'm still connected with called Town and Gown, which is a sort of action research at the service of public government, and to this day remains a great inspiration for me. Led by an amazing woman, Terry Matthews, who worked within the DDC, the Department of Design and Construction of the City of New York. And she felt that perhaps there was a place here where academia could serve public service, technical service, by providing the research that they do not have the time to to um, to look into, to invest in. So we came in with this idea that perhaps the communication and the community relations within the space could be improved. And she had seen a work that I had done the year before
Hmm.
in another Brooklyn part, which is called Red Hook, as part of a larger initiative also led by AIGA, and that I sort of curated. And that was the post-disaster communication interface that people were, um, seeking during Superstorm Sandy. And one of the things that we promoted was this idea of like having a reliable place for people to communicate amongst each other, as well as gather the right information, the reliable information. So inspired by this, sorry, this is a kind
No,
of
no, no.
complicated,
This
but
is
it
good.
also shows like how one project leads to another,
Yeah.
which is always good. So strong of this inspiration, Terry Matthews came to me and said, you know what? We had the architects from Pratt, we had the interior designers. We need people who think now in terms of social engagement and how communication can become improved, and notably amongst the police officers and the community that come into this foyer for many different reasons. And what if you had a screen there? And what if we put a screen in that foyer so that they can sit and wait for their turn to be called, but they have something to learn? Or, and I was like, okay, you're starting from the solution. Maybe we need
Right.
to go back to the problem. So let's just not talk about any screen right now because we don't know that this is the solution. But what we need to know is why people are not coming into that police station. Amongst the data that the police had access to, it showed that the Brownsville precinct is the one that has the lowest information brought to the policemen by the community. So no one is ever saying anything about anything. So
Right.
the level of trust is basically zero. So we started with this approach of like going to the community first and trying to understand what is the perception that people have in the neighborhood of the police, given that at that time, we're talking about 2016, 2017, it was the beginning of community policing, a
Right.
model that was tested in California, where the policemen basically were invited to get out of their car and walk around.
Get to know people.
Therefore, get to know people, get to know people at the level of a human
Right.
body, not behind a shielded car.
Right.
And therefore creating a familiarity of what they look like, the way they walk, the routes they take, and the kind of like familiarity that they can develop themselves with the community that they're supposed to
Hmm.
serve, while at the same time being asked to not live there, because otherwise you get too close to your subjects.
Yes.
That was interesting. Anyway, so we spent a lot of time like trying to understand the perception that people have of the policeman, the perception that people have of danger, where it is, like what spaces it's associated, and the stories. Why were the stories about Brownsville systematically about bad rep?
Hmm.
Bad rep. And even the people who live there have integrated this image for themselves,
Right.
almost like you know stamping it, like appropriating it for themselves. So we tried to imagine how a better communication, and a communication that would shared that would be shared
Hmm.
in responsibility, even like to produce content by the policemen for the people and by the people for the policemen. So reversing the top-down tradition of the police saying, "Yeah, we are communicating with the community. We're bombarding them with like Twitter feed and messages. They know what we're doing." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is not
Yeah.
very friendly
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
very representative of what people want to hear. They want to
So
hear good stories."
they do. They do. So an interesting thing that I heard you give in your answer is when you talk about projects, you're not saying created or managed, you're saying curated. Is that
It,
part of the
mm,
philosophy or approach when you're doing discovery to use sort of
mm.
the resources that are already embedded in the area?
That's interesting that you picked up on this word. Um, I it must come from both a sort of training. At some point in my life, I went to museum studies
Hmm.
at NYU, and I did play the role of a curator, an exhibition curator, several times and many times. But no, what I meant is perhaps my own insecurity to say that I am not officially a designer. So I'm more of, I think of myself more as a curator of designers,
Okay.
that I can actually put them together, make a project that connect those designers to larger problems than themselves and bigger than their belly button, and usually at a scale of um, a city or an environmental issue or a societal challenge.
Right.
You know what I mean?
S-
So I think of myself as a curator of these projects because there's there's a dimension that needs to invent in a way to work together, pick a topic and frame the topic and reshape the topic and deconstruct it and all along I'm accompanying them.
So you're arranging designers to try to match them to the proper aspect of the problem, if I understand this correctly.
Yeah, there's a bit of a ringleader aspect to my
Yeah,
role.
yeah. So this brings me to an event that that your current endeavor is doing. It's designer speed dating.
Yes.
Now, we have some designers or some people who are just getting into design in our audience. And I imagine when you are doing designer speed dating, which is just like it sounds, you get people and they meet potential matches of people who need a designer, and they have a very little
Yes.
time to get to know them. What advice would you give somebody in that situation to to sit down with somebody and find out, am I a match for your problem?
Mm. So that's interesting that you start with the matchmaking because this is obviously as a curator, that's often what I do.
Yeah.
I believe in the surprise dimension of that
Okay.
matching, not just happy wedding, as I used to say when I headed the nonprofit
Right.
Design NYC, which literally its mission was to match designers with nonprofit organizations. But here in the speed dating, what we tried to do is to connect designers to non-designers, so
Yes.
that we could confront the difficulty of assumptions and stereotypes and bias and all the wrong debunk the myth basically
Yes.
of through this particular human format where you are face to face with a human being. And it's not necessarily that you know what your problem is and your designer is going to necessarily solve the problem or be hired to solve the problem, but just to facilitate that encounter, that moment of discovery, of vulnerability, of accepting your vulnerability that I don't know everything. I'm not an expert in anything or not in the field in which you are. And um, yeah, debunk the myth of the designer. And it worked. We did this for,
Outstanding.
I was planning to do it for 1 hour, and I literally have to stop people after an hour and a half.
That's
They would
great.
continue.
Yeah.
So what my recommendation to a young designer would just say, go for these kind of places, these events, these kind of opportunities, because they're like an eye opener. And do not assume that the person in front of you will know who you are, what you do, what a designer is.
Excellent. That is great advice. I like that a lot, especially talking about humility, because as somebody who's worked in this area myself, I find a lot of the times I am being called in to solve problems I really know nothing about.
Hmm.
Just as you are arranging designers, the designer is usually arranging resources inherent in the problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so having that humility
yeah.
of acknowledging that you do not know everything, but you are open, you're curious,
Hmm.
you make connections. I mean, at least that part of your brain should be fairly developed. I love that part. It's the learning part.
It's fun.
I think that's why I like design so much, is because I feel it's like this posture of constant, yeah, absorption. I always say that designer is a sponge. They have to absorb what's around them, and then you squeeze it, and something better comes out of it. Not just
I
an ugly
might
piece, but
steal that. Well, this has been a great conversation, Leticia. At this point, I would like to ask you what we call the one for fun.
okay.
And the one for fun is Ishmael Interactive's mental bookmark, the goofy question that make people remember the podcast episode. Because sometimes a specific name might be hard to remember, but they will remember if I ask you, what's that one thing you always have in your refrigerator? Just as an example. We've talked a lot about trust narratives, and this makes me think of when I was a kid. I was picky. A lot of
Hmm.
things I wouldn't do because I didn't trust a lot. Kids need time to build that up. What is something from your childhood you did not like, but you do now? You've learned to like it, you built that trust.
Mm. Alors, um, I I don't know whether it has to do with trust so much, but it has
Okay.
to do with a relation to nature.
Hmm.
Um, so one thing that we did a lot as when we moved in this house where I am now, where I came back. I came back in my home after 25 years in the States, was to rediscover a garden that was completely taken over by really nasty plants, not just pretty plants, but a lot of nasty plants, especially
Right.
those that come out of walls. And I remember very specifically my parents forcing us to do gardening to help clean up the garden when we moved here the first time when I was 8. And we hated it. Every weekend, it was like, oh, no, we're gonna have to cut out all these nasty, thorny
Yeah.
plants. I forgot how they called in English. But I hated it, and I just thought I would never do this again. And now, what do I do on my weekends? What do I love to do and spend most of my time is gardening. And it sounds like it's really corny, but it's true. It's my time off, my time of quality where I reconnect with myself, nature, and I'm just like going for it, 3 hours a day, easily.
Excellent. Thank
So
you
that's
so
that.
much.
Mhm. Thank you to you for this invitation.
Oh, of course. From us here at Ishmael Interactive, thanks for listening. We will see you again. Bye.